Sounds good.
Live! There we are.
Okay, we are live. All right. We have 0 viewers right now, so we're fine.
Oh, good.
We do that, so this isn't a problem. All right, so should we just start talking even though we have 0 viewers?
Yeah, but all I see is your screen still.
Oh, I'm going to stop screen sharing. There we go. Are you guys good?
Mm-hmm. Perfect.
All right, we are 10 minutes late, so we may as well get started. All right, so welcome to the Q&A with the founder of Pregnancy After Loss Support, Lindsay Henke, and we are also joined by our guest infertility specialist, Justine Fralker, and we are going to be answering questions submitted by our Kickstarter backers from our successful Kickstarter campaign over the summer. So we have about 62 questions to get through tonight, so we're really just going to get started. Our first one is from Shoba, and it was, what led you to pursue this project? So I lost my first pregnancy at around 7 weeks, and it took us about a year to conceive my daughter after that. So I had a very brief stint with the infertility and the pregnancy loss communities. And I realized that there was a really big need for people to start to tell their stories, and as a filmmaker I wanted to approach that very visually, so it came to me to do a documentary about it. And that's how this project was started. The next one for Lindsay. My first child was stillborn at 37 weeks, and I have no other children. What are some steps I can take during my next pregnancy to help me not worry the whole time?
I think that's a challenging expectation to begin with, but what I found and what other women often find is to find a community to support them, as well as making it very clear your feelings and expectations to your doctor. I think finding a support team that will help you be reassured if reassurance is actually what is an accurate medical diagnosis, not to give you like false hope, but to give you real accurate medical information. And also realize that you are going to be more anxious and be okay with you calling in. For example, I was best friend with Jessie, the nurse's line, and we talked all the time, and that helped me know I had a point person besides my doctor that could help call my nurse and give me information.
Great, thank you. The next one is from Danny, and that was, what moved you the most about the filmmaking process? For me, I think what moved me the most was how much people wanted to turn their stories into something that would help other people. You know, a lot of these women and men and families have gone through really unspeakable things, and they want to share their story with the world in the hopes that it can help somebody else so that they don't feel so isolated or so alone. So I'm really always moved by how someone can take something that's so awful and try and turn it into something good. The next question we have is for Krista, and it was submitted by Margot. Particularly in the wake of the Planned Parenthood organ tissue donation scandal, I wonder if you'll be addressing donation after terminating for medical reasons or stillbirth. I wish I had the opportunity to donate my aborted for fatal brain malformation, diagnosed at 28 weeks baby's tissues or organs. Do you know what the barriers, legal, cultural, medical, are that prevent parents from being given that option?
Well, we're not going to be discussing that in the film per se, but it's a very personal choice, I would say. I think the best thing to do would be consult your medical provider on what the options are. Make sure they're doing it the right way, and again, it's just a personal decision that we would never try to convince someone to do one way or the other.
Great, thank you. The next one's for Lindsay, and this is from someone named Lindsay. What ways has she, I'm not sure, maybe somebody in the movie, has she found most effective to encourage her family to honor her baby?
Well, for me, what happened was it was lucky that my family chose to also embrace the loss and honor their grief in different ways. And I think being open about my own grief helped other people see that I wanted my baby to be remembered too. And one thing that I think was really helpful, where I encouraged people and said this is something I want and need, was when I asked my family to go to a walk and remember in remembrance of my baby that died. And everybody showed up and we wore T-shirts and said Team Nora. And that was a way that I really said, like, this is an event just for my baby.
That's really great. I think that's good advice for people too. The next one is from Angela. Will men be interviewed as well for their perspectives? I'm really glad that somebody asked this, because I get this question a lot, and I wanted to say that it's really important to us to have the male perspective in this documentary. Pregnancy loss and infertility are not just women's issues. They belong to the man as well. And I don't think that we're ever going to get away from this cultural stigma and this cultural silence unless we start acknowledging that there's somebody else in this equation too. It's not just the woman going through it. So it's going to be really important to us when we interview each family that we also get to interview the partner, the husband, the father. So there will definitely be men interviewed for their perspectives. The next one's for Lindsay. How do you deal with others' pregnancies and babies after a loss?
This was always a hard one, and I think that we go through different stages. I know that when I was trying to conceive after loss, it was just heartbreaking to even see other people who were already pregnant or were pregnant when I was pregnant with my first baby and had their baby. And then when I became pregnant again, I thought that that would go away, but I remember writing about how I had pregnancy envy of people who still had their innocence, and I felt like it was lost. So things that I've done and I still do is I kindly decline invitations to baby showers and other things that I don't feel are going to help me or nurture me during that time, but I still keep like a kind heart open to the fact that I'm happy they get their baby. I'm just sad I don't get mine. And stuff that I still do is like, because I have this superstition piece, is I don't go to baby showers, but I do send presents to babies after they're born. So just different things that kind of preserve my own feelings about things and giving myself permission to not do some of those things and keeping space for that, but also keeping a kind heart.
That's great. Thank you, Lindsay. The next one's for Carletta, and this is from Fertilify. What are the main things women do to prepare themselves for another pregnancy?
I was looking into some research. Pregnancy.com or pregnancy.org talks about some main things to do when you think about having another baby after a loss. And the main thing is not just your physical state of mind, but also your mental state of mind. And knowing that you have a support system in place so that it won't solve any problems, it won't make the pain go away. Understanding that as you're preparing for the new pregnancy, understand that you have a lot of emotions, you need a strong support system, and also take things slowly. Like, don't rush the process. Pregnancy is about 39 to 40 weeks, and to really be open to that process, and that it might take a while. So Pregnancy.org has a really great article, actually 2 articles, that talk about 4 or 5 really good things to do as you're trying to get pregnant the second time. And I will send that.
Thank you, and we'll put that on the showcase link. The next one's for Krista from Leslie. How can I best advocate for the health care I want if my doctor has to follow protocol with every pregnancy? I would like early ultrasounds and frequent checkups to help reassure me and ease my stress, but I'm getting a lot of pushback from my medical team.
I definitely think you have to be your own healthcare advocate in that way. When I had a miscarriage earlier this year, and when I got pregnant again, I stressed to the doctors that I wanted to be seen early on. If your doctor or whoever you're being seen by is giving you pushback, it's time to probably look into another doctor's office or midwife practice, whatever you prefer. But there's no protocol per se. Each pregnancy is different, and you should definitely, if you're asking for additional checkups or additional ultrasounds, there really should not be a problem with that. I'm 28 weeks right now, and I had a little medical issue today, and they brought me right in, did an ultrasound, totally not what they usually do. I shouldn't have even had another ultrasound for the rest of my pregnancy, but I was scared. They totally understood, and they took me right in. So I guess, if you're having any pushback at all, change your doctor.
That's great. The next one's for Carletta, and this is from Akabetka. What stats on infertility, age, percentage of population nowadays?
I went to the CDC. They have a couple of different stats available. So the number of women, percentage of women between under 44 is about 10%. They have impaired fertility, which means there are inability to get pregnant or carry a baby to full term, so they call it. But it's about 6.7 million, nationwide. And also they talk about the number of women ages 15 to 45 who have never used any fertility services, and 7.4 million, they still have fertility problems. So it kind of varies. And then also another stat that I received was the number of married women, yeah, that was it. Those are the numbers. About 10% is to have impaired fertility, and for them the definition is if you try to get pregnant, or you can't get pregnant, or the inability to carry a pregnancy to full term.
Awesome. Thank you, Carletta. The next one is from Teresa, and that one's for me. How do other cultures respond to the loss of a baby? And I think that's really interesting. It's something that we're going to be exploring in the documentary, because culturally it can be very different. It can vary from culture to culture. You know, in Asia they do it differently than in South America and in North America, obviously, and everybody has their own individual customs. So there's far too many to go into in one hangout, but I did want to say that we will be addressing that in the documentary because, you know, we live in a very diverse society, so it's important to know that different cultures approach things in different ways. So that'll help us to understand how to relate to each other when it comes to loss. So we'll definitely be addressing that. Next we have from Amy, and this one's going to Krista. With families started in later in life, do the percentage of miscarriages increase?
Yes, the statistics, the percentages do increase as a woman gets older, and I've even seen statistics on as males progress, there's a higher percentage. But again, women over 35 also go on to have perfectly healthy pregnancies, so you can't take the statistics, you know, that it's, you know, definitely going to be you if you're starting later on in life. We'll provide some resources that just give, you know, the real numbers and everything. But again, unfortunately, yes, as age creeps up, the risk does increase.
Awesome, thank you, Krista. This one's going to Lindsay. It's from Kirsten. How long did it take you to get pregnant after your loss?
Well, I had a full-term stillbirth, and we didn't try for, I think it was like 4 months. We were told to wait 6 months just because I went to full term, and there's differing opinions on that, like when a woman is physically ready, and I think we'll talk about that later, versus emotionally. So we took 4 months to start, and then it took us 4 months to get pregnant. I just want to specify that everybody's different, and that I have people, friends in the community, that it's taken a year since their loss to get pregnant again, and they do get pregnant again. And I have other friends that got pregnant right away. So I think it all depends on your own body.
The next one's from Robin. If you had one piece of advice to offer women grieving pregnancy loss, what would it be? And I would just say my personal advice would be to honor whatever form of grieving you feel most comfortable going through. A lot of women feel comfortable writing. Some people seek comfort from their friends and family. But really just to honor what you're feeling. Don't feel too pressured to just get over it or to move on quickly. Or I really believe deeply in just going through things and just deepen your grief, and that's a good way to go through it. So that would be my personal advice. But actually, Lindsay, do you have anything to add to that?
What was the question again?
If you had one piece of advice to offer women grieving pregnancy loss, what would it be?
I really resonated with what you said about just go through it. I mean, you have grief because you have love and hope. And I think if we accept our grief or move towards it, in some ways we're honoring that hope and love that isn't going to happen the way we wish to. And that's okay. But it's really hard to sit with our feelings, especially hard ones. But that's what makes the journey great and difficult.
Awesome, thank you. This one's from Danny, and it is, how has loss changed you? And that one's up for Lindsay, Krista. If any of you have anything to say, because I know both of you had losses, as did I, but what do you guys think?
I think it made me more of a compassionate person all around. I mean, you know, I had heard of my friends or family members that had gone through it before, and you just get such a better sense of what they really are dealing with once you deal with it yourself, and it is so much harder and worse than you could ever imagine, I think. So just much more compassionate for others that are dealing with it.
Lindsay, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, actually, that's what I usually say, is it makes me more compassionate. Sometimes I feel like I'm older than I really am. That I was aged years by what happened to me. And it's not, I think we have to remember that we're not just losing a baby. I know the name of the film is Don't Talk About the Baby, but we're losing a life, we're losing a person. But when you're talking about pregnancy loss, you're also talking about trauma to the body. a lot of what I went through was like feeling like my body failed me. So then, in a lot of ways, I have compassion for a variety of people, more so people who are aging, people who, I mean, it's not the same. People are going through illnesses, but I realize that like nothing's guaranteed, and it also helps me live in the moment more, and maybe be more grateful and compassionate.
That's great. I would say, for me personally, and this is something that we just talked to Professor Lindman about in our shoot last week, loss made me realize that nothing is safe. You know, there is no safe point in a pregnancy. It gave me a big sense of uncertainty in the world. Because I remember when I got pregnant, you know, I saw the positive test, and in my mind, you're getting a baby at the end of 9 months. Like, that's it. You're pregnant, you're getting a baby. And I remember when I had started bleeding, I Googled it. You know, I was like, what could happen? And then when I called my OB's office, I thought, is this a miscarriage? Like, even just saying the word sounded really foreign to me, and, you know, they told me that it could be, and it just sounded like, and I actually said, but I have no family history of this, you know, and I had no idea that that wasn't relevant at all. So I think it just gave me this sense of, it opened a whole new world to me that I had no idea existed, and gave me a sense of that there was danger out there that I had no control over. So that's how it changed me. I'm a little bit of a worry wart now. Gave me a little bit of anxiety. Justine, it's finally time for you to chime in. I've been waiting. This one's from Carlene. At times I think I have PTSD. Whenever I have a heavy period, I would be afraid I might hemorrhage at any time. So, Justine, do you find that PTSD is something that can happen after a loss?
I think so, for sure. I mean, I think that when we go through this process, however long it lasts or when we have our loss, it's going to produce a sense of grief that is kind of unlike anything that we're seeing, especially as a mental health therapist. It's not a diagnosis yet, like PTSD in relation to infertility or pregnancy loss, or anxiety or depression in relation to the grief that we go through. But I see it in my office, and I know that I feel it myself too. Just you get that random Facebook post, and boom, you're back on that day that you got and have to call the doctor's office, and so it puts you right back into that moment, and that's PTSD.
Yet another thing I never thought would be part of loss.
No.
This next one's from Angela. Will you cover how the losses have affected each woman's romantic relationship? And I want to emphasize that we're not going to focus specifically on that. There won't be a part of the movie where we're looking at, you know, how it affected the man and the wife romantically. But, you know, that is a dynamic in a marriage, and that's something that we'll be talking about. Because, like I said, we're going to make sure to get the male's perspective. So we'll be interviewing the husband and the wife together. So we'll be talking about what was it like after the loss? How did you interact with each other? And I'm sure if there was an issue with their romantic relationship, that might come up at that time. So we're going to be looking at the relationship, how it was affected as a whole. You know, how did they relate to each other? How did they talk to each other? Because so far from what I'm hearing, and from what I've experienced, men experience grief differently than women. So we really want people to open up and talk about what the differences were there. The next one is for Krista from Natalia. Can you talk a bit about recurrent pregnancy loss?
We'll definitely be touching upon this in the movie. I'm not sure. You know, we don't have the hard medical facts around it, but we'll definitely be interviewing specialists that will give us more facts and dispel myths surrounding the recurrent pregnancy loss issue.
And I just wanted to jump in. The doctor that we're interviewing is Dr. Jamie Griffo of the New York Fertility Center, and he specializes in recurrent loss. So I can just tell you that when we have that interview in the documentary, he's going to be talking a lot about recurrent loss, who it affects, how common it is, and what could possibly be causing it. The next one is from Shoba. How stressed were you towards the end that you wouldn't make your financial goal? Very stressed out. If anybody is familiar with Kickstarter, it's exhilarating and terrifying, and it's a lot of fun, but it's also really scary because if you don't hit your goal, you're failing on a worldwide scale. Everybody knows it. And you don't get your money. But, you know, we were pretty nervous at the end. There's a statistic out there for Kickstarter that if you hit 60% of your goal, 98% of the campaigns finish after that. So at the time, I think it was a couple of days beforehand, we had hit 60% of our goal, and I'm like, there's no way we're going to be the 2%. You know, we have to be in the 98%. And, you know, it turned out that we were. I think a lot of campaigns find that there's a lot of activity in that last day. Thank goodness. So it was fun. It was exhilarating. Krista, Carlotta, you were there. What do you think?
Nerve-wracking. It was very nerve-wracking.
Very stressful, very, it brought a lot of anxiety, but it was also very exciting, and, as the end approached, it just, we were so into it and excited that every $25 climb was like, an achievement, so.
Yeah, and just to let you guys know, whenever somebody would back the project, I would get an email from Kickstarter saying that you have a new backer and how much it was. And I actually had like an iPad in my house that gave a ding, and I could hear that thing anywhere in the house. So like I'd be up taking a bath, and I'd be like ding, and I'd like get out and run to my phone, and be like, what do we get? Who's our backer? So it's exciting.
Yeah, it was like an adrenaline rush every time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. This next one's for Lindsay from Jessica. Sometimes there's no known reason a stillbirth happened. What are some things a woman can do to feel more in control of her next pregnancy?
I don't know if you ever really feel in control during the next pregnancy, and I think part of the journey is accepting that. It's really, really hard. I remember I had times when I broke down. I don't know, it was probably like 28, 30 weeks until my husband just didn't want to do it anymore. Said I can't do it. But things that did help me and help some of the women I work with are getting to know your baby once the baby moves, getting to know their routine, their movement, and if you find that reassuring, kick counting can be something that helps. See Me Feel Me, the Star Legacy Foundation has a campaign called See Me Feel Me that talks about how to get to know your baby in different ways, and then there's also kick counting, or called the Kicks. They're an organization that comes up and is really advocating for that. I also think, going back to what Krista said, and I was like nodding my head totally when you were talking about just getting a healthcare provider that really listens to you so that they can help you feel in control, that you're in control of your appointments, you're in control of advocating for yourself and then listening to you. If you need to go in and say, hey, I haven't heard the baby in a while, I don't want to do my at-home Doppler, I'm 13 weeks, I was wondering if I could come in for a Doppler check. Your healthcare team, if they're a good team, should be there to support you through that. And that's another way to help you feel in control.
I think that's great. I wish we heard more about good doctors out there. We do hear some horror stories about doctors out there, and I wish we'd hear more about doctors who are reassuring to women after a loss. Hopefully we'll hear more. This one's from Lindsay. It is just, thank you for creating such an inspiring group. I'm 29 weeks pregnant with my rainbow, and your site's been extremely valuable to me. So I know that wasn't a question, but I just wanted to say thank you. This is an independent project, so a lot of this is sweat and blood and time and tears. So it really helps to get messages like that, to hear that the documentary is helping people. And I'm sure Lindsay can relate to that with pregnancy after loss support, as can Justine with Ever Upward. So I just want to say that messages like that are really good to hear.
Yeah, thank you.
This one's from Anna. How did you deal with anger and frustration? So this one goes out to anybody on the call who's had a loss, or even just infertility. So how did you deal with anger and frustration? Go for it, guys.
You feel it and move through it. You actually have to feel the anger and frustration. You can't stuff it down. You can't numb it out. You have to allow it to move through you.
I'm a big fan of that. I think with any emotion, I'm a big fan of just trudge through it, get in it, be really angry, be really frustrated, be really sad. I'm kind of a big fan of that. I don't like to half-ass emotions. So I would definitely agree with that.
Yeah. Well, it was one of those things that I just never thought would ever happen to me, so it made me angry that I was so naive about it, and so I just kind of had to come to terms with the fact that I wasn't, invincible, or this happens to other people or anything like that. It was one of those kind of light bulb went off, okay, this is something you have to deal with. It's not going away. But it was frustrating to think of how naive I was.
I think we have to. Go ahead. I think we have to remember that our feelings are trying to tell us something, and that we're angry and frustrated for a reason, and that's okay. And we might not like it, and it's still okay. And we might not like that this horrible thing happened to us, and we can still accept the feelings that come with it, even though it's hard.
Yeah. I think I'm going to be a little bit more literal, because in the stages of grieving, I tend to wallow in anger the longest. No matter what, I hang out in anger. Someone dies, I'm in anger for a while. I lose my cookie, I'm in anger for a while. So the way I dealt with the anger, to be very specific, is I scrubbed my baseboards. So that's how I dealt with my anger and my frustration. Like, I deep cleaned my house. That was my answer. The next one is from Fertilify. What are the top 5 common misconceptions women generally have about their fertility? I mean, that's a tough one to answer because I don't think there's anything, you know, scientific out there about what the misconceptions are. I'd say in my experience, some of the misconceptions are that you can, you know, wait until you're 45 and just start casually trying to have a family. I don't think that that's the case. I think a lot of women find that's not the case because their fertility does decline as you get older. So that's one misconception. And I'd say another is that something that we've all mentioned here is having control over your fate, which you don't have. I think a lot of women think that when you're ready for a baby, you're just going to, you know, stop taking the birth control, you're going to get pregnant right away, and you're going to have a baby in 9 months. And that's not true at all, as most of us have found. So I think those are some of the common misconceptions. Does anybody else want to chime in on that one?
I mean, I completely agree with you. My first child was, and I know, like, in this audience, this is a terrible thing to say, but it was an accident. It just kind of happened.
He was a surprise, you know? Krista. He was a surprise.
It happened. And so the next time when I tried, I was like, oh, this will be, you know, just have sex and it'll happen again. And so, you know, you kind of get just sideswiped and whiplash, and, you know, when you realize the timing and precision and how things really need to all be in line for it to happen. And yeah, I think that was, for me anyway, a huge misconception.
And Justine, you deal with women with infertility a lot, so what would you say?
I think the biggest misconception would just be that it's going to happen the way they read about it and see in the movies. And so that's kind of like trained us also, so that when that first little frustration, then we lose all frustration. And no, it's not as simple as just relax, but we also know that that also greatly does impact it. And so I think the big part of it is that they just get caught up in the comparison games, especially with our Facebook walls. You know, just the other day I had a client say, she goes, all my friends are having babies. I go, okay. You go, but you're not married yet, or you're not ready to have a baby with him yet, are you? She goes, no, but my eggs are dying. You know, and so, and that part of me knows that, like, okay, she's, you know, over 30. Some statistically maybe, but not so. Like, so I think it's just that reality checking what is reality now.
Mm-hmm.
Answer. This next one's for Lindsay from Claudia. With our Italian community, we support parents with perinatal loss through grieving process and also in pregnancy after loss. In your opinion, is there a right time for parents to try again?
I don't think I'm qualified to answer this, but I'll do it. I think that the research I've done for professional presentations and other professional work has shown that some journals say in the medical community with physicians, there isn't actually an answer to that. There isn't like you should wait 6 months or you shouldn't wait 6 months. Doctors give different answers based on their own experience. And what the research has found is that women usually move at their own emotional pace for when they're ready. So I don't think there's a right time emotionally. And I think the right time is best for what is best for you. And I do also believe that working through the grief is important for timing as well. I mean, there's been stories and accounts of women who get pregnant right away, and that helps them, and they're okay. But then there's been stories of people who get pregnant right away, and then the grief just resurfaces and hits them a lot after pregnancy and after birth of a subsequent child. There's been people who waited a long time and felt like they addressed their grief, and they still are bombarded with grief and feelings. So from an emotional standpoint, I think it's what works best for you and your family. And I think a lot of doctors are saying that as well, also with taking into consideration your individual medical situation. For instance, like I said earlier, my doctor said since I had a full-term birth, not necessarily because I wouldn't be able to carry a child again right away, that she recommended waiting 6 months, but because she said research also shows that my vitamin deficiencies and my reserve had been kind of brought down just because I gave birth to a full-term child. So, like, I needed that time to kind of rejuvenate and heal my body. So she gave me an arbitrary 6 months. She said there wasn't anything super backing it, but that's what was her medical opinion. So I think you need to take your doctor's medical opinion about your individual case into consideration, and also your emotional needs.
That's a great answer. Thank you, Lindsay. This one's for Krista, and it's from Leslie. How do you tell your children when they're old enough that they had siblings that didn't survive? How do you keep them in the family?
Good question. So for my, I have a 3.5-year-old son, and when I miscarried earlier this year, we had told him that we were pregnant, before it happened. And when I had to tell him, and obviously he didn't really completely grasp what it meant, but I did tell him that afterwards the baby wasn't there anymore. It wasn't strong enough, but we're gonna make sure that the baby gets stronger and it'll come back, and just to kind of give him a reason why it wasn't happening anymore. We didn't realize, we didn't know when I might get pregnant again. I am pregnant again now, so when we told him again, we said the baby's stronger now, and now we're gonna have a new baby. For this child, to let him know, probably, but we haven't discussed it really, but I'll obviously always keep that other child in my heart and acknowledge it, and let them know that there was in fact someone in between them, to always hold on to that, because it was a loss for sure.
Thank you, Krista. Lindsay, this one's for you from Akabetka. What affirmations can women say to each other to offer support?
My favorite one is, I think I said it too, I'd have to look at my notes, but it's like, this is a different pregnancy, a different baby, and a different outcome. That seems to help women a lot when they're on our site. But if Pregnancy After Loss, our Facebook support, Pregnancy After Loss support, our Facebook page offers, like, once a week we have PAL affirmations. So I think you can come up with anything that really gets you through the process. So I came up with a lot when I was maybe about 20 when I was pregnant after a loss, and I posted them to Pregnancy Newborn magazine on our post, and I think we share some of them too. Like, one that really worked for me was, in this moment, everything's okay, because in this moment is all I had control over. But I also like the idea that it's a different pregnancy, a different baby. And then when my friend told me towards the end of my pregnancy, my blessing way was just that I have to believe. That's the only option I really had.
That's great. This one's for Carletta from Amy. I had 2 miscarriages and ended up adopting my 2 children after 10 IVF attempts. Maybe adoption can become more mainstream?
Thanks, Amy. I think that the adoption process is really personal, and most women want to have their own child, and those who are looking or open to adoption, they know about the opportunities there. I think when women experience loss, and my sister actually adopted because we didn't think she could have children, and she wound up being able to have children, but they never really considered adoption because she wanted to have her own child. It just kind of worked out for them that we did have our wonderful niece that we have right now. But I think adoption is available and people know about it who are open to that. But most women who experience loss, from my research and talking to people, really want to have their own child. So until they get to the point they're open to have a conversation, it's not really something they want to talk about.
Justine, I know you have feelings about adoption too. Do you have anything to add to that?
I think there's a couple things to remember. It is definitely a personal choice. I mean, and ever upward, it takes me quite a bit of courage to publicly admit that I know adoption is not right for our family, than rather to just do what is expected of a couple after they have had failed infertility treatments. I think a lot of people think of adoption as like the last resort when you have failed infertility treatments, and it's not. There's a lot of families that have always known that they've wanted to adopt children. Just adopt children or adopting children after or in between biological children. I think it really is just there's a lot of different ways to make a family. And you know, as my therapist, because I'm a therapist that sees a therapist, because that means I'm a good one. You know, she always kind of works with me that, like, okay, you guys can know that adoption's not right for you, but it is kind of this thing that it's not necessarily a black and white choice forever and ever. And she's right, because, you know, I kind of joke around that we're guardians and godparents to a lot of kids. I mean, if we're the only survivor, like if some of our friends and family are on the same plane, we're going to have lots of kids in our home. You know, like, so I don't know who would show up on my doorstep and be like, I need a break from mom and dad. I'm staying with Aunt Justine and Uncle Chad for a while. And so what I know is that it took us a lot of courage to say, this is our journey now. We knew that adoption was not right for us really from the very beginning, but that's also not to say that many couples don't change their mind either. It's just, again, a very personal choice, and people who are open to it usually know how to seek it out and things like that. But it is a very viable and great option to build a family.
You know, it's interesting. The question is, when could adoption be more mainstream? But I actually think that your attitude is what's, you know, needs to become more mainstream. Is, you know, acknowledging when something's just not right for your family, even though people expect you to do it.
Right. I'm trying. Like, just even on the back of my book, you know, well, why don't you just adopt? That's everyone's automatic response when they learn that infertility did not work for us. Well, why don't you just adopt? And it's really just not that simple.
Right.
And can I add something?
Yeah.
I mean, I've worked on both ends of the therapist with kids, foster kids, and adoptive kids and their parents, and I've worked with women who've had these conversations about pregnancy after loss and building our family in different ways. And I think we have to remember that. No, man, I forgot it. But one thing I was going to say is that one thing I want to say is that pregnancy after loss, we're also looking at how after loss support. We're also, I always forget the S, at PALS. We're also looking at how maybe your subsequent pregnancy isn't your own pregnancy. So we have some writers who write from the perspective of we went on to adopt, and that fell through, and that was heartbreaking. And we also went on to have a successful adoption for our building our family after loss. And we accidentally got pregnant. Like Erin from Carry On, she writes from that perspective on our blog. And I think we also have to remember that there's a lot of grief that comes in considering an adoptive journey too.
Yeah.
So. Definitely a complicated issue.
Yeah.
This one's from Kirsten, and we're handing it to Krista. Do you know how many women are able to conceive after one or multiple stillbirths?
Women are definitely able to conceive after stillbirth. The statistics or facts we'll be touching upon in the movie possibly, but again, this is something that you really want to talk to your doctor about. There's so many other factors that go into it, and you know why you may not be able to or conceive and or go on to have a full-term birth. So yeah, I would recommend definitely talking to the healthcare provider about that.
Awesome. This one's for Lindsay from Robin. What do women need most when facing pregnancy after loss, in your opinion? What kind of coaching would help them most?
I just have to be honest, I have like a personal response to the word coaching women pregnant again after loss. I just want to, I understand if you're in the position of supporting them, I think that's what they really need, is support. They don't need a lot of like coaching per se. It's more about helping and standing with them and being with them through the journey, helping them connect to other support systems. And if they do need it, helping them, maybe coaching them mostly, and being their own advocate in their healthcare. I think that's a big one, is saying that it's your body and your intuition and you know what's right for you and baby. That would be the coaching that I give. Otherwise, I just give a lot of support by listening, being there.
That's great. It's good advice. This one is for Natalia, and we're handing this one off to Justine, and it's just IVF failed, now what?
Well, you get to grieve the loss, because if it's IVF, you had an embryo. So that's where my journey was. That we had our first round, we had 2 embryos, and it didn't take. It failed, and we took the loan out the next day for the next round because we'd only planned to do 1 round, but then you get the phone call that it didn't take. So I think the first thing is realize that you just lost a child, or 2, depending on how many you tried to transfer, or 3, I suppose, depending on the clinic that you work with. now what? You know, if anybody reads my work, I call this our enough and everythings. I think you guys, the couples, we all kind of have what is our enough. Did I do enough to go to the next step? Have I done my everything in order to then move forward in that next round, in order to figure out what the next step is for us in making that family? You know, for us, like I said, we had only planned to do one round, but it was crushing. And I had a friend look at me and she goes, in 20 years, are you going to be able to look at one another and know that you tried something that really only has about a 30% chance of working? And it was kind of like, no. So we're going to try again. And it was fairly painful to make that loan payment for a while when the babies didn't result from it, but they're still my babies. And so I think, but that was for us, our everything. For us, it was 2 rounds. That's what we could do financially and emotionally. And so families have to remember that they don't have to explain their enoughs and everythings to anyone but to one another, their partner.
That's awesome. Thank you, Justine. This one was from Shoba, and it was there therapy or counseling offered? And I wasn't sure the context of this, so I'm just going to assume it means when we're doing interviews for the documentary. And I'm going to say that there is not typically therapy or counseling offered. Usually when people are telling us their stories, they're pretty together. You know, usually they have thought about what they're going to say, so they don't typically fall apart to the point where we would recommend they go to counseling. But, you know, we always, just in general, there's always a recommendation of going to therapy, going to counseling. I mean, I don't care if nothing's ever happened in your life. Go to counseling. It's great. I like it. It's like going to the dentist. So there's a general offer of therapy and counseling out there.
Amen.
This one's from Danny, and we're handing it to Lindsay. What's the most important thing to share with families who have suffered loss?
I'm just a little confused in like what context to say that. But I think the most important thing to share, if you're someone who hasn't suffered loss as well, is just, I mean, this is what all the articles say. When we write from this perspective, I'm still standing in other places. It's just be with them. Just be open to hear their story. And don't try to fix it. Don't give platitudes. If they have had a recent loss, I know what was really helpful for us is that people remembered that we still had a baby, so they gave us meals. They sent us cards, acknowledging that it happened, and also just being with that person.
That's great. Thank you, Lindsay. This next one's from Jessica, and we're handing it to Krista. Sometimes men take a back seat. They lost their child too. Do you have any great resources specifically geared towards men?
Yes, we'll definitely have some interviews with men in the film, and our Facebook page and Twitter, we try to share a lot of articles that look at miscarriage and loss from a male perspective, since they do feel it too. I think a lot of people perceive, for some reason, especially in early loss, that because men aren't the carriers and they're not going through the physical pain of also losing a child or the pregnancy, you know, they're kind of just there for support. But I mean, as far as with my experience, you know, when my husband found out I was pregnant, he was ecstatic, and when he found out I was miscarrying, he was devastated. But at the same time, you know, he still felt like, okay, I have to be there for you. This is something, you know, you're going through. And I think they try to deal with it more privately than we do, to try to feel stronger or, you know, just stoic. But we're trying to, with this film, show that it's okay for them to, you know, fall apart just like us and feel the pain just as much as we do, because, you know, it's a half and half situation. They're losing just as much as we are. They just don't have to actually go through the physical part of it.
Agreed. Good answer, Krista. This one's from Lindsay for me. What can we do in our communities to increase awareness? And obviously, one of the biggest things we advocate with this film is for people to start conversations in their own communities. And that can mean talking to your parents about your loss or talking to your friends about your loss. And I'm just a big advocate of just starting to tell your story to people who know you already. You know, that doesn't have to mean telling people how upset you were, that you were crying in the emergency room. You don't have to get really emotional about it if that's not how you want to relate to somebody, but just sharing a conversation that maybe you have had a loss, or maybe you are struggling to conceive, I think goes a really long way in raising awareness. Because I think if people realize that it affects people that they know, then they'll see how much more common it is. I mean, just people would never guess in a million years that I had a brief stint with infertility because it took a year to conceive my daughter, but they wouldn't have known about it if I'm not so open about it. And you know, I am somebody that's affected, and they don't know unless I say it. So I think that is something you can do to increase awareness, is just start telling your own story. This next one's from Anna. What helped you most through healing? And this is open to anybody on the call.
Talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
Writing
It was number one. The support from my family, or you know, anything like that, did not compare to talking to others who had been through it and feeling like I wasn't alone in the world, and that there wasn't something wrong with me, that it was something that happened to me. I didn't do it. You know, it wasn't anything that I caused.
Lindsay or Justine?
I said writing. Writing was my introverted way of talking about it, but it did all the same things Krista mentioned. It was a way for me to connect. It was a way for me to see I wasn't alone. I think for me, writing was a way for me to process my grief and my trauma, but also do it in a way that felt safer, because I didn't have to stand in front of somebody at first and say, this is what happened to me. I've had people say to me, well, the internet's so wide and expansive, but I just felt like it was like journal writing. But then I got all this feedback, and I met other moms and dads who had gone through it, and I didn't feel as alone, and I didn't feel as much shame, and I developed a great community that I follow all their journeys now, and we're friends all over the nation and world because we have this commonality. And then we also have the commonality of how we processed and got through the. You never get through the grief, but how we waded through the grief to make our life the way it is today, whatever that might be.
That's great. This one's from Fertilify. What aspects of reproductive health do you consider to be the most important? And that's going to Krista.
Oh man, I can't answer this from a medical perspective. I think you can be the healthiest person in the world and for some reason not be able to produce a baby, or you could be very unhealthy and make lots of babies. So I think the most important thing is to take care of yourself as best as you can, because whether or not you can or cannot conceive, you need to put yourself first and take care of yourself, because if your body's going through a lot, best thing that you can do is just take care of it mentally and physically. But again, I think talking to your medical provider about, you know, what the main problems or, you know, issues that are going inside specifically with you, because everyone has a different issue when it comes to this, would be the best thing to do.
Awesome, thank you. This one's going out to Lindsay from Claudia. What about pregnancy after loss for fathers?
That's an area that PALS are trying to address more. We actually created an online private support group for dads. We have a few dad column writers. I can't say that word. And we've also looked at different, also try to share different pieces from dads about pregnancy loss and subsequent pregnancies that follow. I just think it's really interesting, and I've seen this in the, what is the name of the magazine I write for?
Still Standing?
Yes, I've seen this in the community too. We do have more male writers in that community, but it is a larger community. But I do think at the same time that men seem to process their grief differently, and so creating a community online has been more of a challenge for us than we would have liked. We do, like, even that support group we started a couple months ago, and there's only a few dads in it, and then there's only one person who ever started a conversation. So I think it's just about, maybe goes back to the gender differences in the way that we process grief and also process our emotions as we move through other hard experiences. That's just my assumption, though. But we are trying.
I think that's really interesting that you note that difference. And I just wanted to say that we'll be looking at that in the documentary. We want to see why there's that difference, what that difference is, because I think sometimes that can be a barrier in a marriage when there's a loss. You know, when there's that disparity in how you're grieving. It can look like, oh, my husband doesn't care. He doesn't care that there was a loss, or he doesn't care that we're going through IVF treatments, and it's more than likely not the case. So we need to figure out where that difference is. Justine, do you have something that you want to add to that? I see some nodding.
Yeah. Well, I mean, men, our brains are wired differently, but also vulnerability in men is definitely seen more so as a weakness than it is for us females. But I also think that there's a misconception that Brene Brown writes about this actually in several of her books, that to see our men off of their white horses as our knight in shining armor makes us uncomfortable too. We say we want it, but if he was crumbling in front of me after that loss, there would have been a part of me that would have lost my stuff more. So I think there's pressure for them to hold their stuff together because they got to pick our crumbling pieces up. But there may also be a part of us that needs that, and so we also have to help our partners feel safe enough to have that vulnerability and be that vulnerable with us. It's tough, though. Men and women are, we're just different.
I also think it goes back to the idea that women often are encouraged to reach out to each other when bad things happen and to create communities of support where that isn't encouraged in the male role as often. One thing I will say is that I do lead pregnancy after loss in-person support groups, and together there is more vulnerability in those intimate settings that are in-person support. With PALS, we struggle with the online community piece because that's the venue and the way we do a lot of our support. But I do see when couples come together in person, more communication and more vulnerability. I think it's just depending on the way that it happens.
That's great. This next one is from Leslie for Lindsay. Are there any recommended relaxation techniques to try to minimize the fear and stress when pregnant after a loss?
Sure, and I think Justine could share some of these too, but I would say any kind of guided imagery, meditation, breathing exercises, things that you can find helpful. One thing that I knew going into my subsequent pregnancy for medical reasons for my previous pregnancy, not because I had a stillbirth, but because of my own body. I was told that I was not going to be allowed to have natural birth again, something I came to terms with. But even knowing that, I still looked into hypnobirthing and doing some of the hypnobirthing stuff to prepare. Just even their first couple meditations and stuff was really helpful. So that's what I used. I also think yoga can be good if you're comfortable and if your doctor says you're okay with it. And then it might not be your own in the moment breathing or meditation exercises, but also just nurturing yourself. Massage.
Okay, let's go to the next one. This one's for Justine from Akabeka. How to recover from the emotional impact of infertility?
I think one is probably embracing that this is a lifelong journey. I learn that more and more every day, that this is, because it's a lifelong loss. You will always wonder who they would have been. Different things will trigger you and things like that. But I think recovery means that we have to reach out for support. I obviously believe in therapy for most all of us because life is just really hard without having a therapist to bounce things off of. But writing, like Lindsay said, has been huge for me. We also now have really good research that backs up writing and how therapeutic it is. And I am a huge self-care advocate. I really believe in practicing self-care on a daily basis to take care of ourselves, and this is very necessary in the recovery process after loss or in the infertility battle. So doing those things that fill me up so that I am able to actually be happier and healthier and more present in my life. And I mean, people can tweet me or email me through the blog, but I have endless resources for lots of different kinds of meditation and lots of different kinds of coloring and reading and writing, exercise. I got lists for that.
You really do. You put them out on Twitter all day. It's great. I go on your feed and I'm like, wow, she's got so much. You're really good at that.
Thank you.
This next one's for Carletta from Amy. Are there forums in place to help people learn how to support their friends and family when a miscarriage happens?
Yeah, so I actually, there should be 2 links. They're really good websites. Bellybelly.com is one of them. And then also, I think the other one, forgot the name of the Baby Center, I believe.
Yep, Baby Center.
Baby Center. They have a great list of things to say or not to say when someone has a miscarriage or pregnancy loss, which is really awesome. It also has things you can do, like giving them something to remember. Speak of the baby by their name. They name the baby. They use the name. But there are lots of resources out there to help people who are helping those who experience loss. So those two links are great resources as well as others.
Awesome. Thank you, Carla. This one's from Kirsten for Krista. Does age play any role in stillbirths?
Yes, again, with any type of reproductive issues, unfortunately, the risk does increase with age, unfortunately.
This next one I'm going to take from Robin. What seems to be healing for women after a pregnancy loss? Do you see a theme? And one of the things that I saw in the interviews that we've done so far to be very healing was to have some sort of a ceremony around a loss. There was one woman we spoke with who had 2 losses, and she was really deep in depression, and she hadn't really fully grieved it, even though she was sad. And then her religious leader offered her a ceremony, sort of a funeral for her 2 babies. And she had the opportunity to name them and to plan, funerals for them. And she said that ceremony was very healing for her. And I think, as a culture, we don't really put much ceremony around pregnancy loss, and we should, because I think there are a lot of healing aspects to, observing rituals after you've had a loss. So that would be what I've seen the most. This one's from Natalia, going out to Lindsay. How do you share your story while honoring your space?
Okay. Well, I think this is in regards to writing about my story. That's why I'm conceptualizing this question. So I go back to this, when I started writing and blogging, I actually took a class on blogging, and one of the great things from Liv Lane, one of the great things I walked away from it was that I get to decide how much of my story I share. So it's kind of like thinking about disclosure. So I don't share everything about my life. And I also think this is important when you're writing or blogging and sharing about your family and sharing about loved ones close to you. There's certain things I decide that are just for me and I keep secret. And there's other things I purposely share because I feel like I need the feedback from others, and I also think others could benefit because they feel the same way. So that's how I kind of hold space for myself while sharing my story. But I also think it evolved. Like in the beginning, I felt like I needed to share my story a lot because I wanted to connect to others. Now I'm struggling with, is my story finished? Is there more to be told? Do I need to end? Do we need to make space for other people to share their story?
I think that's great advice. Thank you, Lindsay. This one's from Shoba. How difficult was it to get participants to open up? And my answer to that is I wouldn't say it's difficult at all, because luckily we've been interviewing people who have approached us and wanted to be part of the project. We would never approach somebody and ask them to be part of the documentary and they didn't want to. So it's been very easy. We just ask somebody what their story is and they share it with the project. So it's very easy. This one's from Danny for Krista. Have you learned anything about the grieving process that you didn't know before starting this project?
For me, I wanted as much information as possible and to talk about it as much as possible, and that's really what helped me through my grieving process. But I also realized that everyone has a different grieving process. So whereas, that was my method, I did know people that had either recently gone through it or gone through it themselves who weren't as, ready to open up about it or just kind of wanted to forget about it and move on. And so it really helped me realize, everyone has their own grieving process, that there is no right or wrong way to deal with a pregnancy loss, but just to do what's right for you. And if you don't feel like moving on right away and you do want a lot of information and you do want to talk about it, that's what's going to help you through it. But just because others don't want to talk about it or, feel like, they want to kind of forget about it and move on, doesn't mean that's right for you either. So just remember that whatever you feel is how you should feel.
Awesome, thank you. This one's from Jessica, going to Carletta. Other than therapy and support groups, what are some great resources for those who have experienced a late stillbirth?
Well, I'm actually going to defer to Lindsay because I was just going to say that I'm sure there are different books and resources, but Lindsay, what did you use to help you with your late term?
Sure. I did go to individual therapy. I went to support groups for a while, me and my husband. And as a therapist, I have to advocate for those. But I also think I know some people don't find comfort in those spaces. So other resources I used was Still Standing was a huge one for me, where I got to hear a lot of different people's experiences with child loss at any stage, and then pick what resonated with me and what didn't. I also connected with the News Foundation. They have a lot of great forums and resources for children that have died at any age, and then there's also the Compassionate Friends and Share. Is it Share, Justine? Share Pregnancy Loss? Yes, Share Pregnancy and Infant Loss. I found one thing that really helped me was connecting on Instagram. I know that might sound weird, but finding other moms who were sharing their story. I know through there I found Carly Marie and all of her great work. And yeah, there's just one thing led to another where I found more and more resources that connected to what I needed at the time.
That's great. Thank you. This one is a little bit longer, so I'm going to paraphrase. I'm going to put this out to Lindsay. It's really more of an issue. Why is it that in the baby loss community, those of us who do not get rainbow babies are virtually ignored? We're practically the pariahs of the community because, God forbid, people acknowledge that there's a chance they won't be able to have another baby.
I think that's true. I think that a lot of women who are in the pregnancy loss community and don't always get to have another baby. I think that's the reality, and that's one that we all have to accept, even on our own journeys, that we might not end up with another baby, and that's really hard. I also think we have to validate people's experiences that this is difficult, and I don't get that same outcome as you. And I also want to kind of address that I don't personally believe that the only way to heal is through subsequent pregnancy. I think that you can find other ways to heal, and maybe people would say, well, you had a subsequent pregnancy, so that's why you can say that. Maybe that's true. But I know in my first grief journey, and I talked about it, or in the beginning of my grief journey, and I talked about it a little bit, like a lot of my grief, I think we have to remember we're grieving a bunch of different things. Like, sometimes women are grieving the fact that they don't have any living children. So they're childless mothers. I said that right? So there's places that developed like Still Mothers, which is a great resource for that community. Mm-hmm. And I think that when we're grieving that, we're also grieving our parenthood or our motherhood that we don't get to have in the way we envisioned. I know that when I lost my firstborn and didn't know if I could have a subsequent child, I was really grieving not just my child that died, but also my motherhood. And I think that can happen. I also think that, going back to what I was saying before, is I was also really struggling with my relationship with my body. And I think that one way that I helped heal the relationship with my body before that was I started running. And I ran a half marathon 4 months after Nora died, because it was a way for me to reconnect with my body. So I think we're talking about a lot of different issues all within one, and we need to be careful of that and really explore what it is we're grieving. And we also need to validate people's experiences that, yeah, we don't all get to have a child after a loss. So how do we acknowledge them and welcome them into our circles?
That's awesome. Thank you, Lindsay. This next one is from Margot, and I'm going to take it. I feel like there's a generational shift going on in terms of the perceived propriety of speaking out about infertility and pregnancy loss. But for some women my age and younger, there seems to be an impulse, even a requirement sometimes, to talk about it more openly. The general assumption among younger people seems to be that talking about it reduces shame and isolation. Do you have any idea why that shift is happening, and do you think there's any potential downsides? I do see that generational shift happening, and my opinion is that it's because of social media. I think that there's a generation raised on Facebook and Twitter, and they're used to sharing, a lot of parts of their lives with the world, and I think those people are starting to experience these things, pregnancy, loss, and infertility, so why not share it in the same way you've shared the rest of your life? So I do think there's that generational shift. as for everybody knows how I feel about sharing your story, so I don't personally see too many downsides. I guess there's the idea of oversharing or TMI, which I'm not a fan of. I think when it comes to pregnancy loss, you can't overshare because it's raising awareness. But I don't know. I just read an article today about there was a famous woman who shared about her miscarriage, and I guess she was engaged to Bow Wow, the rapper, and he uploaded a video after that saying that her announcement was lame and that she was just seeking attention. And this is a woman who's engaged to him, and she just announced her miscarriage on social media. So I think that there's definitely still the risk of being shamed for sharing your experience, or for being accused of being, for lack of a better word, an attention whore. So there's that downside for sure. There's that risk when you're sharing that part of your life. But in my opinion, I think the potential upside is much more important, that you're raising awareness, and you never really think about who is hearing your story, who might be going through something similar, and you're letting them know that they're not alone. So I think that's an upside that's more important. That's just my opinion as somebody making a documentary about sharing your story. I'm not biased at all. This one's going out to Lindsay from Lindsay. How did you tell your daughter about her angel sister?
I really like this question. So at first it was hard for me. Honestly, some people I know and I work with, they talk to their babies in the belly and they tell their subsequent child about their child that died. I wasn't brave enough to do that. Honestly, I didn't talk too much to Zoe when she was in me. We talked in our mind. And when she was born, I was looking for her sister. So it took me a couple weeks after I brought her home. I definitely had that grief reaction. I bawled over Zoe many times in the weeks that she was brought home. But then slowly, when I felt at a safer place, and when I brought out pictures of Nora, and I brought out Nora's scrapbook. And actually, I do remember when I brought Zoe home, the first thing I showed her in the house was Nora's picture. So, but then I didn't address it again for a while. And now that she's 18 months old, I just posted something on my Instagram account this last weekend. Now Zoe will pull, I don't think she knows who the baby in the picture is, but she'll pull out Nora's photo album and say baby and point at the photos, and I'll tell her about who she is. I also think there's some great resources, like Someone Came Before You, which is a children's book, which helps you talk to your child about the baby that came before them. And if you have a miscarriage or a pregnancy loss or a stillbirth after you already have living children, there's a book called We Were Going to Have a Baby, but We Had an Angel Instead. So, and I know there's other child book publications coming out that kind of address that issue, so you can sit down and talk to your children about the child that died.
Thank you, Lindsay. This one's going to Justine from Natalia. What are some steps to have insurance companies cover infertility?
This is a loaded question. I think, Resolve is a big organization that does Advocacy Day in Washington. I wrote letters to my congressman this year for their Advocacy Day. So I think that's a big part of it. I think it's asking, the more we ask insurance companies, but also I think we have to share our stories, and we have to ask for what we want and need in order for insurance companies to feel the pressure from us to have that they cover these treatments. Because also when we ask for what we want and need, we educate the basic population about why infertility does need to be covered by insurance companies, because it is a disease. I will say, as a therapist, I think mental health coverage needs to be part of this infertility coverage. So if I'm going to pay for IVFs, then they need to be in counseling. That's one of my things, because I struggle, again, it kind of comes up with that enoughs and everythings, but I see a lot of women in my office that have never sought treatment or mental health counseling until they're 10 or 12 years into trying, because insurance pays for it all. And so I think there's a fine line there, I think, sometimes, and no one wants to talk about that stuff, but I like to talk about the hard stuff, so that's a piece that I think we need to talk about still.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Let's go to the next one. This is from Anna. How does having a successful pregnancy after loss help healing? And that goes out to any of us.
Well, I can say I thought it was going to be very helpful, and it has been. My due date for my pregnancy that I lost is next week, and it is weighing on me very heavily in a way that I did not expect. Kind of can't wait for it to just pass and, you know, move on to the rest of this pregnancy. I'm not due until December, but yeah, it's definitely a little more painful than I thought it was going to be, since I am pregnant right now.
I would say having my successful pregnancy after my loss really helped a little bit. I mean, I definitely had a lot of anxiety during that pregnancy because I knew what could happen. I knew how bad it could go and how late that could happen. So I'd say that definitely added a lot of anxiety, but I wouldn't say a second pregnancy really affected the first loss at all, because it's a different baby. It's a different person. So it's not like, you know, I used one to cover up the other. You know, it's just meeting a new person.
I think that's good to know. And I also think, like what I said before, for me, I felt like my body failed me. So in a subsequent pregnancy that was successful, felt like my body and I were maybe back on the same page. And my subsequent pregnancy, like Anne said, was a different person. So you're still grieving. I mean, I had a lot of grief during my subsequent pregnancy. I had a lot of grief after.
This next one is from Fertilify for Carletta. Do you find that women are generally more educated on reproductive health after experiencing fertility issues, or is it typically the same?
Oh no, I definitely think they're much more educated. Even myself, in doing this project and going through stillbirth with a friend of mine over the summer, you know, I've read a lot. I've talked to more people. I think you definitely become like the mini expert in whatever your area is, just because you want to be informed and you also want to be able to know more if you do decide to have a subsequent pregnancy. So yeah, definitely much more aware and informed.
Awesome. This one's for Lindsay from Claudia. How do you educate the community in supporting pregnancy after loss?
We are working on that. That's actually one of our initiatives. I'm excited that you asked that. We're starting a PALS ambassador program and still coming together, but we're trying to figure out how to use, or not use, but have you as the PAL mom or whoever is pregnant after a loss or trying to conceive, educate their doctors and their mental health professionals and their healthcare providers about what it is their needs are during their trying to conceive after loss, their subsequent pregnancy, and even going on to parenting after loss. And even going in and talking about what your loss experience was like and how you want things to change and how you want them to be different. So we're trying to start an initiative, and we're working on how that might look. So anybody who's interested, they can email us. But we're wanting to get that paperwork and that literature together so that people can start campaigning for their own healthcare providers. Because think about it, in our community, we have the people that meet with their doctor weekly sometimes, or more than that, and can advocate for their own needs.
That's great. Thank you. And I just want to say, just as a tool for educating the community, we do hope that this documentary is going to be something that people can, you know, show to their friends and family and to their community members and say, you know, this is what I'm going through. This is a way to relate to me. So we'd like the documentary to be just one of the tools in that toolkit. This one's from Leslie, going to Carletta. What are some good ways to include previous miscarriages or angels when announcing a pregnancy to a large group like on Facebook? I want to honor the babies that didn't make it full term while I'm announcing the celebration of the baby that's on its way.
So that's an interesting question. I think that it depends on the person and how much you want to do or not do. I would probably want to hear from either Lindsay or even you, Anne, because I think when you announce pregnancies, like after you've had a miscarriage or a loss, is a little different. It's a little more difficult. And if you haven't actually, had the baby, how does that affect your ability to actually celebrate? Because one of the articles I was reading talks about, taking it day by day, being very careful. And a lot of women, they had like a list of quotes, will wait until after the baby, actually was born because they were so fearful. And kind of like Krista said also, the anniversary of your miscarriage, you're very anxious around that time, you're very nervous, so it will probably be after that time just because you want to get through that hump, that emotional hump, that mentally draining hump. But again, I would defer that, I guess, to the other ladies who actually had to do that. I'm not about announcing on Facebook.
I didn't actually announce my loss at the same time as my announcing our subsequent babies, but I'd have to say I like the way Mark Zuckerberg did it. I think he did that in a really tasteful way of saying that he took sort of a somber note to say that he and his wife had suffered 3 miscarriages, but they were also excited to announce that they were going to have another baby. So I like the way he did it. I think he had a good mix of the severity of the situation and admitting what had happened, and also the joy for the new baby.
I think if you follow PALS, you'll see from time to time the whole point of the group and the site was to talk about, when you're talking about a subsequent pregnancy, you're talking about embracing joy while working through fears, right, and anxiety. So one way we embrace joy and acknowledge our fears is we ask the community oftentimes, give us examples of how you do exactly what this person's question they ask. So we'll get a lot of, if you just follow the Facebook page, we'll get a lot of examples and posting probably every couple months of what people actually do. Some people include a stuffed animal, some people wear a necklace, some people, it's subtle, some people, they wear rainbows in their announcements, some people wait till later, some people do it as they find out. So everybody's different, but there are some ideas on that paper.
That's great. Guys, we have 5 more questions. We are in the home run. All right, this last one is from Akabetka for Justine. Why is there almost next to no emotional support provided at fertility clinics?
I wish I knew this, the answer to this, and I am trying to work to change it. I have worked with Pamela Zadinos, the author of Silent Sorority, and she admitted, she's like, kind of made myself an enemy of the infertility clinics. And I was like, but here's the thing that I'm trying to figure out, like, if we provide more emotional support to people going to infertility clinics, I think that they might actually get pregnant more often. But my sample size is really small because I just have a private practice. So, but I feel like that emotional support, if infertility clinics gave referrals for mental health counseling, and it was more of a requirement, just rather than like, here's your last, oh yeah, if you want to go talk to somebody, here you go, but here's reasons why you think that we think it could help you throughout this process. That emotional support needs to be part of this process, and it can be through lots of different resources. It can be through things like PALS or the share groups, or through infertility support groups, or acupuncture group. I mean, there's lots of different resources, but I think it has to be all-encompassing if we want our numbers to increase, I think, especially, and more importantly, so that we don't keep losing ourselves completely to this battle that it is to make a family for some of us.
Justine, do you think that all it has to do, the lack of support for counseling, do you think it has to do with our society's view on mental health and the stigma around it? For instance, my husband and I are ready to do IVF, but we don't want to see a shrink.
Right.
Do you think maybe there's an aspect of that?
Absolutely. I mean, I still can't believe, I do a local television show here in St. Louis, and they love to introduce me as like, Justine is our expert therapist, the therapist who sees the therapist. I'm like, this is a good thing. Yes, I see my therapist. Now it's maintenance, and so it is changing. I mean, I think especially with social media and with blogging, our negative stigma on mental health care is starting to change, but we definitely have a long ways to go. We don't like to talk about the hard stuff. It makes us uncomfortable. And going to see someone for help and support, we still consider to be the hard stuff, even though it's really the good stuff.
And not to mention the connection between mental health and physical health, and how it goes both ways. If you're not, everything's not good up there, you're going to show it physically, and vice versa.
Yep.
So.
Yep. Absolutely. We actually, exactly. And Brene Brown's new book, I'm certified in her work, and so I just finished my training for Rising Strong for the new book, and she has named this now stockpiling. If you stockpile your emotions, they will eventually overflow through your body. The body always wins.
I just started that book. I can't wait to talk to you.
Oh, it's so good.
Okay, this one is going to me from Amy. When our society socializes us to believe that you get married, have a baby, and live happily ever after, maybe in the schools the stigma of miscarriage, etc., should be addressed. this is something I'm passionate about, and I'm actually trying to get a scene from this for the movie of, what it looks like when we actually educate our teenagers about pregnancy loss, because I know I'm not alone in this. My high school experience, especially with health education, was if you touch a penis, you're getting pregnant. End of story. And I can understand why they, have a message like that, but it's just not biologically accurate. And I think that it contributes to a lot of women growing up and having these problems and thinking, well, what's wrong with me? Why aren't I getting pregnant right away? So I think it's definitely something that should be addressed in health education, in when they have that in high school. And like I said, I hope to get a scene from that in the movie, because I'd like to see what that looks like when you have a group of teenagers and they find out what it's actually like. I'm working on that. We're still working on getting that scene. This one's going to Krista from Kirsten. Do you have any information on the likelihood of multiple losses after 2 losses?
Okay, yeah, again, we're going to touch upon this in the film with Dr. Griffo about recurrent loss, but for the most part, if you've suffered a miscarriage, your likelihood of having another one is just as much as anyone who has not had one. The odds are pretty much the same. I think it's after 3 that they start to actually look into if there is some sort of medical cause or a predisposition for some reason that you're having them. But definitely women who have had 2 miscarriages are completely able to go on and have full-term pregnancies.
Thank you. This one's going to Justine from Robin. What would you say to a woman who, for whatever reason, can never have a child after a pregnancy loss?
Well, first off, you're not alone. But you got to reach out and seek support to know that. I think the biggest piece is that, for me, I just did a podcast recording about this, and for my process, it has been able to figure out how do I honor the mother within me, and how do I find other ways to parent. HuffPost just ran a piece. They changed the title. They ran it today. So people really hate the title that they changed it to, but I talk about how I'm still a parent even though I don't have children here on earth to parent, and how I have found other ways to parent.
Awesome. And this is the last question of the night from Claudia to Lindsay. How can we improve hope in subsequent pregnancies?
That's a tough question. I think what we encourage, though, is actually loving the baby, loving both babies, creating a relationship with your child that died, whatever that relationship is for you, and honoring that loss as a different baby than the baby you are now pregnant with, and connecting to the baby you are now pregnant with by connecting to the baby you lost, creating space for both of them. And by creating space and having the courage to love anyways, despite knowing what's going to happen, hopefully we create room for hope, but realizing that we really don't have any control. And I think that, I was really nervous when I went in for my follow-up appointment after Nora died, and I was 11 weeks along. No, I was farther along. It was around my anniversary of Nora's loss, so it was in December. So I was 20 weeks pregnant. I went in for an appointment that was not scheduled, not with my normal provider, and the woman could just tell I was not doing good. I was shaking, I was terrified, but I was trying to hold it together. And she sat me on the table, and she said, "The relief goes away when they put your baby in your arms, but then something else is going to happen, and something else is going to happen, and life just gets in the way, and we're never totally guaranteed that our baby's always going to be okay, even as they get older and grow up into adults. We're never guaranteed anything. So how do we learn to live in this moment and still hope for the best?" That's all I can say.
Well, thank you, Lindsay. That was a really great answer. All right, so that's it. We have answered 62 questions in just about an hour and a half.
Woo, we did it.
So I want to thank everybody for their participation. Justine, thank you so much for coming on. Justine is the author of Ever Upwards, so definitely check her out on Twitter and her website. And Lindsay is joining us from Pregnancy After Loss Support, a wonderful partner. So check them out at pregnancyafterlosssupport.com. And of course, we are Don't Talk About the Baby, the documentary taking the stigma away from pregnancy loss and infertility. So thank you for joining us, and we'll see you on social media.
Yay! Thank you.
Yay!